a key thing about our platform is that we're completely personalized. So we capture what every woman's unique hormone baseline levels are, and then we detect fluctuations by comparing to that. So one of my big pain points is that a lot of the at-home testing that's out there really compares women to some standard threshold, and that perfect woman that we all know isn't really in existence. At Oova, we believe that everyone is perfect in their own way, and we really embrace that. So we try to understand what each woman's unique fertility profile is and help her achieve a fertility goal, whether that's trying to conceive or just understanding her cycle. There's a lot of nuances there, which I'm sure Jill is going to dive into today. Happy to answer any questions you guys have about Oova as we move forward. You can always drop them in the chat box. But I'm incredibly excited to have Jill Blakeway join us today. As a quick intro, Jill is an acupuncturist, herbalist, and the founder of the Yinova Center, where she began treating patients for over 2 decades. Jill has always been passionate about helping people achieve a healthy pregnancy, so much so that the New York Times has described her as a fertility goddess and named her as one of Manhattan's top acupuncturists. She credits much of her success to combining the ancient wisdom of Chinese medicine with modern conventional biomedicine. To this end, she joined forces with a reproductive endocrinologist to co-author the best-selling book, Making Babies, a proven 3-month program for maximum fertility. Actually, a fantastic book, guys. I have read that cover to cover, and it's really good. And it's all about how to conceive naturally. She has also authored 2 other books on health, healing, Sex Again, Recharging Your Libido, and Energy Medicine, the Science and Mystery of Healing. So Jill, we're incredibly excited to have you join us today and talk to us about how Chinese medicine can influence fertility.
Well, thank you, Amy. It's lovely to be with you. And thank you, everybody, for coming on to Zoom this evening. I'm really happy to talk about this subject because Chinese medicine has a long history, like thousands of years long history of treating hormonal issues and helping women to conceive and supporting women through pregnancy and postpartum. And there are a lot of misunderstandings about Chinese medicine, and I'd like to talk to you about what it's based on. And it sounds woo, but it isn't. So it's based on the idea that your body has qi, that has a life force. And as you know, most ancient cultures identified some kind of life force, some sort of idea that we were alive. In India, it's called prana. In the Judeo-Christian tradition, it was called the breath of life. The Greeks called it pneuma, which is also related to the breath. And the Chinese called it qi. And what qi is it's your body's intelligence. It's like your operating system if you were a computer, which of course you're not, but if you were, it would be like your operating system. And what that means is that there is an enormous amount of decision making going on in your body completely outside of your mind. And there's a reason for that. Minds are quite unreliable. They're good for logistics, but they're very narrative and storytelling. And so you never have to think, oh, I must, put in my Google Cal that I have to ovulate next Tuesday, or I should remember to calibrate my thyroid or any of that. It's all happening mostly from your brain, mediated by your neurologically or via blood chemistry. But it is a coordinated system. So it's not just mediated in isolation through blood chemistry and neurology. It is a consciousness. It's a form of consciousness. It's a form of awareness and then the ability to act. And in Chinese philosophy, that has always been seen as yin and yang. Yin, the ability to be aware, and yang, the ability to transform given a prompt. And so every cell in your body understands who it is and where it is and what it's supposed to do next. It coordinates its efforts with its neighbors because it's aware, and given a prompt, it has energy, it has mitochondria, and it creates energy, and it can transform. And that really is what qi is. It's that ability to be conscious and then transform. And so, as you can imagine, nowhere is that more important, in fact, than your reproductive system, which is an extraordinarily finely calibrated feedback system amongst hormones and blood flow and neurology that requires coordination. And all of that happens outside of your mind. It often, when I give that real thought, I'm in awe of how intelligent we are. And I have to tell you, I've done my job for over 20 years, and I deal in women's reproductive systems most of the time. I've spent all day diagnosing some new patients for the Yinova team as they go into our centers. And I am more in awe now than I was at the beginning of how completely smart our bodies are. So often when people are struggling to get pregnant, it's clearly a big deal, and it gets a bigger deal month by month. And it's hard. It's really hard. And a lot of what I do is kind of emotional support. But interestingly, it's often not big things that are getting in the way. And everybody assumes there's something big wrong. But if you're diagnosed with unexplained infertility, which is a very dissatisfying diagnosis in some ways, what that usually is lots of tiny little synchronizations and coordinations that are off. And often we're able to help. And the reason that Chinese medicine is good at doing this is that we have a method of diagnosis called pattern diagnosis, which means that we only ever look at symptoms in the context of other symptoms. So we're always looking at the consciousness, the qi, the consciousness of the body and its ability to communicate internally. And we're looking for places where that communication has gone awry. And that gives us a very unique perspective. It doesn't make us better than Western medicine. It just gives us a different strength. We have a very contextual strength when it comes to understanding a pattern of disharmony. Conventional medicine is extremely precise, and that, of course, is a known strength. But if you've been diagnosed with unexplained infertility, all that precision is for nothing in some ways. And that's where our subtlety and our contextual view of the body starts to become really important. And what it means is everybody has a different pattern. Everybody. So, you may have some symptoms in common with other people, but some of your symptoms won't. And the way we look at that is different. So we provide at Yinova a separate, different, unique herbal formula for every patient for the most part. And we do that to kind of meet their ever-evolving landscape. And we change that formula week by week as people go through their cycle and then as people improve. And that's, we're known for being good at this. And that's the secret of our success, is sort of tailoring that to every patient. And what that means is there is no one-size-fits-all solution at all, particularly when it comes to herbs. And I often have patients who come to the office and they're taking a herb. Chasteberry is a very good example of this. And they say, I'm taking this because I read on the internet it was a fertility herb. Well, just like there's no fertility drug per se, there is no fertility herb per se, because everybody's situation is different. And a woman with PCOS who is having trouble conceiving has a completely different situation to someone with a luteal phase defect, a very short luteal phase. And you wouldn't necessarily use chasteberry in all cases. I bet you're wondering when I use chasteberry. So I'm just going to, as an aside, tell you that I mostly use it to tighten up the action of the pituitary after the LH surge. And this is where your Oova data comes in really, really handy, because what we want to see is your LH go up and come back down, and then your progesterone go up nice and smoothly and quite high straight away. And what often happens is it takes a while, it lags, and your progesterone takes a while to build. And I use chasteberry for that, but I don't use it for other things, or, at all, like a thin endometrium or, something like that. So herbs are specialized, and we prescribe for people that we treat. We do have, and we didn't for a long time, but we have introduced an over-the-counter line of herbs. And what we've done with those, we've asked you, it's based on my book, my first book, Making Babies, and we've asked you to identify your fertility type. You can go to yinovacenter.com and read about the fertility types. And if it's confusing at all, you can take a quiz, and the quiz will work out your fertility type. It's all there on the website, and then you can get a formula for your type. And that's our way of doing tailored herbs for a larger cohort of people, and those herbal formulas are helpful. In fact, on bad days, one of the things I love to do is go and read the Amazon reviews of Making Babies, because there's hundreds of reviews now that say, I did what they said in the book and I got pregnant. And really what Dr. David and I wrote that book with Dr. Sammy David, who's a reproductive endocrinologist. He was actually the first doctor in New York State to do an IVF. So clearly, Dr. David and I are getting old. And what we did was we split people into 5 groups, because we wanted to give them different advice. So we have one group that we call the tired type. And those people are metabolically sluggish. They often have insulin resistance, that kind of thing. They're tired, sensitive to sugar, put on weight easily. And we wanted to give them different advice, very sort of clear advice. They often run cold. That was to boost their metabolism, to boost their fertility. And then we have what we call the pale type, who are often undernourished, sometimes because they diet strictly or over-exercise, and sometimes just because their digestive system doesn't pull enough nutrition from food. And they end up, sometimes they have hypothalamic amenorrhea or really long cycles, and we wanted to give them advice that was all about, in Chinese medicine, nourishing blood, but really giving them proper nourishment. And then we have the waterlogged type, who are a bit like the tired type. They're metabolically sluggish and sensitive to sugar, but they tend to have PCOS, and they're a little bit of a different, we wanted to give them different herbs and different advice. So in the book, we did that. And then we have the dry type, which is people who are suffering from dryness, vaginal dryness, dry skin. They often are having night sweats and hot flashes. They're a little perimenopausal looking. And we wanted to make sure that we gave them plant estrogens and things like that, and kind of boosted their estrogen naturally and safely. And then the last type we wanted to give the absolute opposite advice to. Those are the people we call the stuck type. These are people who are so common in my practice. I see a lot of this. These are people who are slightly estrogen dominant in relation to progesterone, and they end up with, at the mild end, PCOS or painful periods. It can in further advanced cases become fibroids or certain types of endometriosis. So that is how we split people up. And we do now have a herbal formula for every type. And I wanted to talk to you about acupuncture and how acupuncture helps with fertility. I'm sure if you're listening to this and you come to a talk like this, you've probably heard that it does. There's a lot of clinical research that shows that acupuncture is actually very good at boosting fertility. And like herbs, I always think that our subtlety is our strength. You know, I said these hormones are in very fine feedback loops with each other, giving people pharmaceutical hormones tends to be very strong, and it has an on cost. It has side effects, and it sometimes knocks the sort of feedback loop out. Whereas what we're doing is just drawing people back into balance really gently. And it is a gentle treatment, but sometimes that's all you need. And remember, I said at the beginning that if you're not getting pregnant, it feels like a huge problem because it is to your life. It may be a small thing. It may be a very small hormone imbalance. And I think that's why Chinese medicine is so good at treating infertility and struggles with fertility. So acupuncture, as you know, is just the putting of very tiny needles at certain points in the body. They're called acupoints. And I should just reassure everybody, if you haven't had acupuncture, they really are tiny needles. It's not like having a shot. They're like a hair. You could tie them in a knot if you needed to. They're very small. So how does something that tiny make a difference? I hear you ask. in my mind. And the answer, I actually wrote about this in my last book, Energy Medicine. I went on a bit of a journey to look at how acupuncture really works. There have been lots of theories because we know that it does, and they're all partially true. But it is more complex than that. And one of the things that has become apparent is that acupuncture points are different tissue to the rest of the body. You can spot them on MRI. They look different. And I expand on that a bit in the book Energy Medicine. And the reason that they're different, it turns out, I know this thanks to some studies at the University of Vermont Medical Center, where they looked at these points and wondered why they were just slightly different to the tissue around them. And what they found is that when you put a needle, when an acupuncturist puts a needle in the point and then twists it, which is what we do when we do acupuncture, the connective tissue winds around the needle like spaghetti on a fork. And when it does, it becomes much more electroconductive. Connective tissue is electroconductive anyway. It has a high collagen content, which means it has a high water content. But the tissue stays wound around the needle for the whole treatment, and it's a little bit more electroconductive. And they found out at the University of Vermont, when you try and pull that needle out at the acupuncture points, it has a 20% stronger pull force. It requires 20% more energy to pull it out there. So the body grabs the needle in a different way at the acupuncture points. And the reason for that is lies in embryology. And I thought I'd mention that tonight because people are thinking about getting pregnant, think about embryology. And it turns out that when an embryo creates itself in the womb, what it's doing, it doesn't have a particularly well-developed cardiovascular system or neurological system. So all the ways the body normally communicates are slightly off limits to start with. And so what it does is it does it electrically. And your homework, your mission, should you choose to accept it, is after this, if you go to YouTube and Google electric frog face, you'll see a video from Tufts University, which is a video of a frog embryo growing. And it just has like lightning going across its face as these electrical charges happen. And so it creates the embryo, clever embryo, specialized electrically conductive tissue at points, a bit like systems theory in computing, at little nodes where it buds off the next one. It changes polarity at a certain point, and it buds off the next part of a fetus. And those nodes, those embryological nodes, are in exactly the same place as the major acupuncture points. So I think it would be fair to say that the tissue that was used to create you is more electroconductive than the tissue around it by a little, 20% more. And at that point, it can be still used to regulate you. And so I wanted to explain that because it can feel so impenetrable, Chinese medicine, but there is physiological substance to it. And when we look at acupuncture and fertility, what it appears to be doing, amongst other things, is it gives you a bit of an endorphin release during the treatment that lasts over time. So it's very good for relieving stress, which is a good start. But that isn't all it's doing. Thermal imaging shows that it reduces inflammation, which is very important to implantation. And Doppler ultrasound can show you that it increases blood flow to areas that are being needled in a way that has a longer lasting effect than just the treatment. So you can imagine it's helping to bring blood to the ovaries and supporting a healthy follicle and a healthy egg. It's reducing inflammation. It also balances hormones, and it does that very, very gently. The clinical research shows that it's particularly good at reducing prolactin, which is often a hormone that rises due to stress, but that regular acupuncture creates hormone balance. And that's certainly our experience at Yinova. Our experience is that patients who come to see us regularly start to have cycles that drop into place and that kind of thing. And really, that is what we do. There is there's a lot of clinical research out there about Chinese medicine and acupuncture, but I wanted to draw your attention to just one, and we have a link to this on our website. There was a meta-analysis of couples, women going through IVF, 1,000 women. And it was building on work that had already been done that showed that acupuncture increases the efficacy of IVF when it's done around transfer and, before and after transfer. But this meta-analysis looked at the whole 3 months before people went through their IVF, over 1,000 women. So it was a substantial review. And what it found was that they've split people into 3 groups. One group had no Chinese medicine whatsoever. One group had just that little bit of acupuncture around their IVF transfer, and the other group had what we call whole systems Chinese medicine for 3 months before doing their IVF. And by whole systems, we mean everything we do: dietary advice, lifestyle adjustments, herbal medicine, specialized reproductive massage, acupuncture, supplements, the whole thing. And the people who had that had, Amy, you're so quick. Amy just put that in the chat. The people who had that had a considerably higher live birth rate, which makes sense to me that healthy people with well-regulated cycles have, healthier pregnancies. So that's basically it. They have more, they had a greater success at IVF, but they also had a healthier pregnancy all the way through. The next group were the people who had the acupuncture just around the transfer, and the group that had no Chinese medicine came in third. So I like to suggest to people that they get, if they can afford it, and there are various price points to come into Chinese medicine, that they get acupuncture and the whole system of Chinese medicine. They look for an acupuncturist who's also a herbalist. Not all of them are, for 3 months before an IVF if they have the time. Now, if you're always in a race against time, or a lot of people are with fertility issues. So I wouldn't suggest delaying an IVF necessarily. But if you do have the time, and if you're trying to conceive naturally, giving yourself 3 months to get things in order is actually a really good idea. So I like to see my patients for 3 months, but I just take people as they come at Yinova. And what we do, if you've ever seen an acupuncturist, you'll know, is we ask a lot of questions, not all of them relevant to your, or seemingly relevant to your reproductive system. And that's because we're taking a whole look at you. And I can't even begin to tell you how many patients' fertility problems I've solved by sorting out their digestion. It's a lot. And what I do as a practitioner is I just set about trying to get a cycle to look as perfect as possible. Because my experience is when that happens, people get pregnant usually. So I'm looking, and this is where your Oova data comes in. I'm looking for a 28-day cycle, and people get pregnant on all sorts of lengths of cycles. So it doesn't mean you won't get pregnant if it's not 28 days, but if you come and see me, I'm trying to get you to 28 days. I like a day 14 ovulation, and that's because people get pregnant on much earlier ovulations, but the egg is a little less mature at that point. I think day 14 is perfect, but our rhythm is our rhythm for a reason. People get pregnant with late ovulations too, but again, it's deteriorated just a little bit. And then I like to see people's progesterone go straight up and stay up there. It doesn't have to be a straight line. It will never be a straight line. In fact, it'll move around, it'll zigzag, but I don't like it to do the big zigzags, which speak to some surging, and that I will try and correct with herbs and acupuncture in one of my patients. And then I like to see it come down nice and smoothly, not come down and then go up at the end. And we like to see a period that starts with flow, not spotting, which a lot of people have. That speaks to a sort of unsmooth relationship with progesterone as it comes down. At least, 4 days of flow, probably in a light day, would be great, or anything above that. People vary hugely. No PMS at all. If people have PMS, and I've had several people with PMS today, it goes on my list of things to fix. And no menstrual cramps and no clots in the blood if we can make that happen, because that speaks to a nice smooth endometrium without sort of mucousy areas in it. And so I do that with herbs and acupuncture. And what I do in my practice is every month I get to the end of the month and I review. If you're on Oova, I review your Oova data. If you're not, I review BBT charts, or I just review the information that I've collected week by week. And then I set my plan, my treatment plan for the next month. And a good practitioner is always moving the case forward. Yeah, we're never standing still. And what I usually do is I have a long-term goal, which is usually a happy, healthy pregnancy. It's usually a pretty common long-term goal for my patients, but I set short-term goals so that we can all measure our efficacy. So they know they're not wasting their money coming to see me, and I know that I'm making progress in the case. So I set a number of short-term goals. I've been treating new patients all day, so I share the short-term goals with the patients so that we know where we're going and we can measure that we're, getting somewhere. And some of today's were things like no PMS, or no mid-cycle spotting, or no menstrual cramps, a 14-day luteal phase, things like that. And then I tick them off my list as we get there, and I adapt the treatment until they're ready to do their IVF, or they get pregnant, or something like that. And I've done this for so long, and I have to tell you, it's never got old. I think, it's obviously enormous fun to help nice people have babies. I'm at the happy end of medicine. And I've done it for so long that some of those babies are in college now, and things like that. And people write to me on their children's birthdays for years. Literally for 18 years, people write to send me an update on their little ones who are now big and in college. So it's incredibly satisfying to do. And what I want you to take home from this is that Chinese medicine has thousands of years of experience, but it's not old-fashioned at all. It can adapt and change, just like it's adapted to combine with assisted reproductive techniques. We practitioners stay current, but we stand on the shoulders of giants. We stand on the shoulders of people who were extraordinary doctors, who didn't have modern diagnostic tools, and used tongue and pulse and signs and symptoms to understand something as complex as the hormonal system, and develop treatment for it long before we developed any kind of treatment in the West. And I think it's significant that we still use the classical formulas at Yinova as the base for our formulas. We vary them, we add herbs and things like that. But those classical formulas that have been used for hundreds and hundreds of years are still as relevant today as they ever were, because they're subtle. And one last thing, because I know that this is something that people think about. Herbal medicine is, there is a big variety in quality in herbal medicine. I lose sleep about the quality of herbal medicine because my patients get pregnant. And so it's really, really important to me. At Yinova, we source our herbs here in the United States. They're manufactured for us here, and they're tested. We know that they're not contaminated in any way. They're made in California, where they have very strict rules about this kind of thing, which gives me some peace of mind. But it's good to get your herbs from a reputable source, and not just buy herbs from the internet. There can be a sort of broad variety of quality there. And my worry is two things. One, that you're not actually getting the active ingredient, which means that you have expensive pee at this point. And two, contamination, which, coming up to a pregnancy is not what we want at all. In fact, we get a lot of our patients tested for heavy metals anyway, because it's a bit of a barrier to getting pregnant. So I think that's half an hour, Amy. I think we covered a lot of ground there.
That was absolutely wonderful and really informative. So thank you so much, Jill. I'm going to open it up for questions to the group. I have a bunch of questions that I wrote down, but please feel free to drop them in the chat or open up your mic and ask live, whatever you'd like. I'll kick it off. You mentioned that your body is showing patterns of what's actually going on. For somebody who's starting to like analyze their body, like what are some easy ways for me to start monitoring those patterns?
Well, here's some of the things that I mean, the first thing is that your period is actually a sort of visible sign of what's going on in your body. And you kind of know that because when you've had a really stressful month, you get more PMS. It's not psychosomatic. You've created more stagnation. You've got tighter and tighter. Your shoulders have got up by your ears, and nothing in your body is communicating as it should. And so all your hormonal transitions end up being a little glitchy and things like that. So first of all, looking at your cycle is really important. That's why Oova data is really important. Oh, we have a vegan question. I'm going to answer that because I like to answer that. Yeah. And then I would look at digestion. Yeah, because to give you an example, lots of people just put up with constipation. I can't. So many patients tell me, "Oh, I've always been like this. I'm just constipated, and I only go every 3 days or every other day." And you should be moving your bowels every day. The reason it's important is your body gets rid of excess estrogen in two ways. One, your liver takes it up and deals with it. Two, it goes out through the stool. And if your stool sits there for any length of time, your body pulls water out of it. And when your body pulls water out of it, back comes the estrogen back into your bloodstream. So one of the causes of mild estrogen dominance in relation to progesterone is constipation. So when patients tell me they're constipated, I get them moving. I usually start with something simple like magnesium at night, magnesium citrate at night, because it's good for stress too, and it helps people sleep. Shall I answer that vegan question? Because I love that. Where was that? Oh, yes. I heard that being a vegan makes you bleed less. I typically bleed for a day as a vegan. Is this bad? It's not bad. Nothing is bad. Nothing is bad. But yes, it's a little short. And sometimes vegans are a little undernourished. We use the fertility type tincture we use for that at Yinova that you can just buy online is the pale type. The vegan diet is actually so healthy in so many ways. To eat plant-based is so good for you. It's good for your heart. It's good for all sorts of things. But you do have to make sure that you get enough protein. And it can sometimes be difficult. I sort of ate vegan for quite a bit during lockdown, and we cooked lovely food, but it was an effort to make sure that I had enough protein. So here's usually what I suggest. First of all, a good iron supplement is probably a good idea. And the one that I like is Floradix, which is a German supplement. It's made, it's a liquid supplement. It has to be kept in the fridge. It's perishable, but it's extremely absorbable and it's very safe. The OBs give it to their pregnant patients. The pediatricians give it to tiny people. It's safe and it's very absorbable. So I would start there. If I were you, and make sure that you have enough, that you're not a little bit anemic, and take a little bit of iron, and then watch your protein. And then you'll see the results by your period lengthening, a day and then another day and that kind of thing.
Thanks for that, Jill. You mentioned that there are multiple entry points for Chinese medicine and trying to conceive depending on your budget.
Yes.
What would be the initial offering for someone who wanted to just dip their toe into this field, and what results could they expect?
Well, there are different price points. And so everything from, what Yinova is a boutique practice where you are alone with the practitioner. You have a lot of privacy and a lot of sort of personalized attention. I don't think we're expensive. I try and keep our costs down, actually, because I think a healthy practice has a wide variety of people coming to it, sort of a diversity of people coming to it. And I think that's good for us as practitioners, and it just makes us a more vibrant and lively practice. So I try and keep our prices down as much as I can, but obviously it's more expensive expensive to have undivided attention. But there are practices that are called community clinics where you're treated more communally, and that can be cheaper and a lot cheaper. And there are also school clinics, which are a good option for a lot of people if you want to save some money. You'll be treated by students, but they're supervised by licensed practitioners. And so that's a good idea. Someone asked how much herbs are at Yinova, and I wondered if Emma, who is listening, could write in the chat how much the over-the-counter formulas are, because I don't know, but someone will, and we'll answer that for you.
There's another question in our chat. You mentioned chaffberry. How could women use this to enhance fertility?
Well, as I said, you can use it to tighten up the action of the pituitary at ovulation. I think it gets overused. And I often take people off chasteberry. It has a reputation for correcting luteal phase defect, which of course it does by tightening up when your progesterone goes up, but it's not as high in progesterone as people think, and I don't think it's the best option for low progesterone. But if you look at your Oova data and you can see that your LH goes up, and then there's a sort of gap where your progesterone languishes, and then it goes up in a sort of slow like this rather than boom like that, then that would be a good use for chasteberry. And I usually give it to people from about 3 days when they normally ovulate until 3 days after, something like that. Oh, and Emma, there's a question about the personalized herbs too, the herbal formulas. Would you answer that one too?
Yeah, it's the same answer. So the 1 ounce is 25 and the 2 ounce is 50.
Yeah, not too bad. Not too bad. And the 2 ounce lasts 2 weeks usually. Yeah.
Another question that we got is, do you ever combine Eastern or Western medicine in your recommendations? For instance, I've had issues with high iron in my blood, and I'm worried it could be affecting my fertility.
Yes, all the time. And by saying that, I don't mean that I make a Western medical diagnosis, but I coordinate with doctors the whole time. I think it's really important for fertility acupuncturists to be very medically literate, actually, which is why I wrote my book with the doctor. I think most people want the best of all possible worlds. They want, the best that Western medicine has to offer without being over-medicated. And then they want all that wisdom from Eastern medicine from accrued over thousands of years without being completely alternative. That's, usually what I hear from patients. So I do, and I do take your Western diagnosis into account as I diagnose you. And so, certainly high iron, I would very much take into account.
Do you have any food recommendations for improving fertility?
Well, yes and no. In making babies, we gave 5 separate diets because we wanted to really target it. There isn't, a one size fits all when it comes to that, although there is some basic advice, which is don't get too hung up on very strict fertility diets. You'll drive yourself nuts, and it's not worth it. I've had so many patients who've got so tight with trying to control their diet, and we actually have a blog article on the Yinova blog. We have a very lively blog over at yinovacenter.com that was written by a patient about what happened to her when she just got so rigid about her diet. And she remembers that this was secondary infertility. She already had a child, and she wouldn't eat cake on her kid's birthday. It became like a superstition, if I do this, I'll never get pregnant, sort of thing. So you have to have a regimen you can live with, and you can cheat here and there. Like 80% is perfection, that's an old Chinese saying, but it is the sort of 80-20 principle. If you're good 80% of the time, you can slack off a little bit for 20% of the time. But what we're aiming for is some good quality protein. If you're vegetarian, that will will obviously be vegetable protein, which is completely fine, or, you know, some good quality meat, not too much of it. You don't need a ton, but regular. If you're going to eat meat or fish, regular. If you're going to eat fish, choose the lower mercury ones. There's lots of ways to Google that. You know, the fish higher up the food chain tend to have eaten the little fish, and they've got more mercury in them. So, you know, be cognizant of mercury, but fish is very good for you. But just be cognizant of that. Healthy fats, really important. In the early days of my practice, everybody was on a low fat diet and they were very hard to get pregnant, frankly. And there's lots of evidence that people who have healthy fats do better. They have less ovulatory problems, that kind of thing. In fact, there's a famous study, the Nurses' Health Study, which looked at enormous amounts of women, nurses across the country, and they found that women who drank whole milk are more likely to get pregnant and less likely to have ovulatory problems. I think that's mostly to do with the fat content, I imagine. So lots of fats, but, you know, not trans fats or processed fats, things like olive oil, avocados, nuts, that kind of thing. Hydrate. You need to be hydrated to produce good quality cervical mucus. Go easy on the coffee. It's not the caffeine, it's actually coffee. It's very acidic and it affects fertile cervical mucus. So, and easy on the alcohol. When Dr. David and I wrote Making Babies, we thought 5 drinks a week was fine as long as you didn't have them all at once, all on the same evening. You should have some alcohol-free evenings every week, and lots and lots and lots of colorful fruits and veggies, and you'll be fine. And then we give more targeted advice in Making Babies.
We have a question on menopause. I want to put a prequel to that. With the Oova data, we see that many women are reporting that they're perimenopausal, but I'm curious if they actually are, versus just being advanced maternal age and having irregular cycles. Are there any patterns that a woman can look for to indicate that she's actually perimenopausal versus just irregular cycles?
Well, it's I remember being in my 30s and reading that everybody over 35 was somewhat perimenopausal and being horrified. So it's a long period of time. But here's what I see in perimenopause is people assume that your estrogen just sort of slowly goes down until you go into menopause. But that isn't what happens. What happens is in the years before menopause, and it can be quite a few years, up to a decade, in fact, you just get a bit more surgy, particularly of estrogen. So it's not that your estrogen's going down, it's sort of surging in irregular patterns. And then it's hard for a progesterone to offset it. And people get a little bit estrogen dominant. They start to, I had one today actually, who is in perimenopause, trying to get pregnant. I think she'll get pregnant once we've got the surging sorted out. But she said just that, I never had these problems, but now I'm like a teenager again. I have, you know, a breakout before my periods, and I have PMS and that kind of thing. And what that is perimenopause. But there's no hard and fast rule about it. But if you start to have symptoms, particularly around your cycle that you have not had before, and you're in your, I think 35 is considered a bit young, to be honest, but if you're in your 40s, it's worth getting a little bit of advice about how to manage those. You don't have to even call it perimenopause, actually. Which sounds kind of dire. It's fine. It's just sort of age-related minor hormone imbalances. They can be addressed.
And I know you were interested in answering this question. I want to just ask a couple of questions on progesterone specifically. You mentioned when you were talking about progesterone that you like to see that plateau activity happen, and you don't like those zigzags of like the fluctuations going up and down. We see that a lot with our Oova users. It's actually pretty common. Yes. What do you think the cause of that is, and what would be your recommendation for intervention?
A little bit of up and down, just fine. However, if it's, you know, going up and down a lot, what it really is, it's a combination of stress and fatigue. So your body's tired and you don't quite gather the resources together to, you know, it takes a lot of energy to get your progesterone to go up. And then stress moves it back down again. So it's actually the other way around. You get stressed and pressure cookery and your progesterone goes up, and then you get exhausted from the effort and it goes back down. If I see a sawtoothed BBT chart or a sawtoothed Oova chart, I think of that. I also think alcohol sometimes can play a role in that. And by that, I don't mean an excessive amount. Women process alcohol less well, sadly and unfairly, as we get a little bit older. And so sometimes that's, it's good, that's affecting the data a little bit too.
And does natural progesterone cream work uniformly for low progesterone to support pregnancy?
I'm glad you asked. I am not a fan of it for natural progesterone cream for this. I'm a fan of it for perimenopause, which is what it's designed for. It's designed to offset that little bit of estrogen dominance in perimenopause, and it does that really, really well. But when you're trying to get pregnant, what do you need? You need to keep your progesterone levels as level as you can. And you can imagine that dosage is an issue with the natural progesterone creams. On a dry day, more goes into your skin. If you're sweaty, less goes in. You put a glob of it on your arm and you try and get it to be the same size as the glob you put on your arm yesterday. It's a little imprecise for my taste. And so as someone who is, likes to find the most natural solution possible for every problem, I actually do send people to their doctor to get pharmaceutical progesterone because the dosage is stable. And I think having stable progesterone is actually important to implantation.
Great, that's really great advice. I know we're getting a lot of questions. I would say keep the questions coming. Jill, if you're open to it, I'll email you some of these questions if you can just summarize some answers that I can send out afterwards. I want to move over. We had offered a raffle for our Oova users to sign up and ask Jill some questions about their cycle. And Susan, you are the winner of that raffle. So I would love to open up the floor for you to ask any questions that you have about your cycles with Jill. Just for everybody else's knowledge, we do, one thing that Oova does provide is that if you're working with an Oova provider, so if your clinician is actually an Oova provider, we share your Oova data with your clinician so that you don't have to figure out what information to share with them. We take care of all of that for you. So your doctor is actually able to get your real-time hormone measurements and you don't have to worry about anything on your end. So I'll open it up to Susan and Jill to kind of have your quick consult, and then we can move on from there.
Hello, Susan. Thank you for hanging in with us here. I have your 3 charts open. I have the one from, let me make this bigger so I can actually see it. I have the first one, which is November, and then November, December, and then December, January, and January, February, and March. So would you like to know what I see, or would you like to ask me questions?
Please tell me what you see, because I have this tracker, I have an Ava bracelet watch, and I do OPK tests, and they all tell me different things. So I have no idea what is what with my cycle. So I would love your insight.
Yes. Well, this tracker is actually measuring your luteinizing hormone and your progesterone. So it's pretty good. You can sort of trust it. I think this is a good one. And there's good news. This recent cycle was much better is what I'm seeing. And I was actually going to ask you what you did. But when I look at the first cycle I have 3 months of data on Susan, and I'm not showing it to you just because of privacy reasons, medical privacy, but is it okay if I just describe the way that looks, the progesterone? This is what we call a saddleback chart. Your progesterone, here's the good news about your cycles. You're surging on day 13 or 14, you're ovulating on day 14 or 15, and you have a 28, 29 day cycle. Pretty perfect there. So these are the good things. And everything that's going on is kind of minor. But on that first chart, what I see is your progesterone goes up beautifully, straight away. No need for Chase Berry for you. Just you surge, your progesterone goes up. And then it sags back down a little bit, which speaks to me that you're a little under-resourced. Like you can galvanize to get your progesterone up. But then the effort it took your body means that, or the corpus luteum means that there's a little sort of dip. And the problem with the dip in that first chart is that it happens around implantation kind of thing. And so I would want to get that up. And in Chinese medicine, we'd give you a category of herbs called kidney yang tonics. If you were buying an over the counter from Yinova, it'd be the tired type. And do you run cold, Susan? Are you a little bit cold naturally? Yeah, that's what it looks like. It looks a little metabolic, this, to me. So we would want to warm you up. And as we set goals, what are the things I'd like to see is your circulation to get better. So if you have cold hands and feet, or you're always the person who is in a sweater when everybody else has taken theirs off, that's what I can tell. It's amazing what you can tell from an Oova chart, huh? And then I get to your second month, and this was your weird month. This was the end of the year and the beginning of the year. And this one is your LH surges on a perfect day, on like day 13. And then your progesterone takes a long time to go up. Yeah. But it is, in fact, the same energy. You're just a little metabolically under-resourced. You have kidney yang deficiency in Chinese medicine. It does go up, and it actually goes up around implantation, which is great, but it never really sustains there. And so that is it's minor. You could get pregnant on that chart, fear not. But I would, if you were my patient, I'd be getting that up. And then your most recent chart was a triumph. It was a triumph of good chart. Again, you surged on day 14, which is your LH surged on day 14. Your progesterone went up nicely, and it stayed up the whole time. It sawtooths a little, but it doesn't have these big swings that you had in the month before. Yeah, a little bit of moving about is absolutely fine, but it stays up the whole time, comes down nicely just before your period. Do you get a bit of PMS?
Yes.
Yeah, there's a little bit of PMS showing on it drops off a bit of a cliff at the end. It goes boom, straight down. I'd like to see it slide down a little bit and you'd get less PMS. And that's how, that would be nice for you anyway, to have less PMS kind of symptoms. But that's how I'd know that we were sustaining progesterone a little longer. So I would set that as a goal. And what your diagnosis, I haven't done enough to be absolutely precise, but I've met a version of this chart so many times in my career that what this looks like to me is a combination of kidney yang deficiency and what we call liver qi stagnation in Chinese medicine, which is just a whole body way of describing a body that is just metabolically a little sluggish and running cold, along with some tightness, stress, kind of, and tightness. Of course, trying to get pregnant is really stressful. Having so many ways of assessing your cycle is stressful. Yes. And so just running a little tight, which is making your hormonal transitions just a little less smooth than they should be. But honestly, Susan, it's quite fine-tuning. And this last one was not bad at all.
I changed my diet in January.
Yes. There you go. And it's showing on your chart.
Yeah.
By the time we get to the February chart, isn't that satisfying?
Yes.
It's really satisfying. One of the things I love.
You got a wax still, so.
Yeah. What did you do? What did you do to change your diet?
I've been gluten-free already, but I've been eating a lot more vegetables, organic foods. I cut out dairy because I thought I had inflammation in my body. So I don't know if that's actually good or not. I see a naturopath for the first time at the end of this month. But I kind of did that as a trial because I've been reading a lot of different books about what else I could be doing.
Well, I don't want you to have to read another book, just like I don't want you to have another monitor, Susan, because I want you to be as, stress-free as you can be during all of this. But in our book, Making Babies, you would follow the program for the tired type. You're a tired, stuck type in Making Babies. And it's extremely gratifying fertility medicine to practice because little changes show on the chart. And if we keep going, then people get pregnant. So I hope you see that as encouragement, that you had two slightly sort of all over the place charts, and then you changed your diet and you have a lovely one. And that's really encouraging. My experience is that people who start to drop into place like this, stand a much greater chance of getting pregnant. So whatever you're doing, keep doing it, because that last chart looked good.
Thank you. I didn't know it was looking good. I thought the waves were still bad. So thank you.
No, tiny waves in comparison to the great big like up and down swings you were doing just the month before, actually, which is really exciting. It often shows, a change in diet often shows the next cycle. That's why your cycle is such a good indicator of what's going on in the rest of your body. Well, good. I'm glad we did this. Thank you for waiting all the way to the end. Poor Susan didn't know she'd won until just before the event.
Is that going to help also with in the beginning of my period? I don't know why, but now I've started spotting. Like I now have like 2 or 3 days of spotting before flow, and it used to be like half a day and then I'd flow. So I don't know what, I thought I was doing something wrong.
No, you're not doing anything wrong, but you know how we said that progesterone goes down a little precipitously at the end? That's the next thing to work on.
Okay.
In fact, is sustaining it. And I think this diet will probably do it. You could buy some of the herbs for the tired type. That would be another good thing to do. But really what that is, spotting is complicated, Susan, because you have to decide whether people are spotting at the beginning of their next cycle or spotting at the end of the last one. And of course, it all looks the same. I usually can tell from a chart, like an Oova chart. I can't just tell by spotting. And the people who are spotting at the beginning of the next cycle are spotting because of stagnation and poor flow. They often have retroverted uteri or something like that. They don't have 2 uterus, but I'm talking about lots of people. And they have a retroverted uterus or something like that. And all the blood vessels that supply it are like hoses with little kinks in, and they sort of spot at the beginning of their cycle. You, from this chart, look like you're spotting at the end of the last cycle. And it's because your progesterone comes down quite precipitously. And what we do with that is we have to resource the corpus luteum, the follicle that originally held the egg, because that is what's keeping progesterone up. So we start by looking after you in your follicular phase, actually, before you ovulate, resourcing the egg. And then we change tack after, and we resource the corpus luteum in a different way after it starts to produce progesterone. Are you doing acupuncture, Susan?
I did before COVID for a couple months, and then COVID, and I haven't been back since. And I think I want to change the practitioner I'm using too. They didn't talk anything about herbs, and they just
find yourself someone you resonate with who also does Chinese herbs and can explain what's going on. There's a board called ABORM. The American Board of Oriental Reproductive Medicine, that they have a website of fertility practitioners who've passed their exam. I predate their exam. I'm so ancient. There wasn't an ABORM in my day. However, that might help you find someone locally with a fertility specialty, ABORM.
Okay, thank you.
You're so welcome. I'm happy to meet you.
Thank you guys so much, Susan. Thank you for sharing your journey, the data with everybody. And Jill, I can't thank you enough for being a part of this event. I hope everyone found this to be useful. We'll be sending out a recording of this talk after the event, and also we didn't answer a bunch of questions that we received. So Jill would love to get your thoughts on those, and we'll circulate those answers as well.
Absolutely.
But thank you everybody so much. I hope this is as informative for you as it was for me.
Thank you, you guys. Good evening. Have a good, I'm going to go and have my dinner now. Take care, everyone.